Welcome to Kevin the Great Witness. The New Adventure series is show. We're here with Kevin from the UK, and he'll be recounting his experiences on the real side. And I'm Dean Bell. I'll be commenting, asking questions. So welcome again, Kevin.
This real side experience was a series of scenes that didn't seem especially connected, but perhaps they were, and it was simply that the parts of the experience between each scene were absent that made them all seem a bit random. The real awareness does skip over the irrelevant parts. The destination, perhaps, sometimes more important for us to see than how we got there. The scenes may not necessarily be in the right order either, but remembered in the order that they were shown to the personal self. I would find myself in a car with another individual, travelling along roads at night, the roads winding through deep forest that was either side of us. The individual I was with was the driver, in fact, and I had the impression he was perhaps a real guide. So this would reveal my agreement with the guide that I was willing to follow his direction, and if the car represented also then an attitude and not just a means of transportation, it would be a personal self attitude or idea that was in alignment with the real awareness and the isness that this guide represented also. A beneficial attitude then that I was sitting in, and that supported my process of becoming more aware, and allowed the guides into my experience, and to extend their assistance also, allowing the guide to take me where I needed to go, rather than sitting in attitudes, say, that would be at odds and conflict with the real awareness and present as resistance to the ears and the guides. The forbidding forests we passed through, perhaps representing creation and the ever-present threat and danger of all those that lurk within, that given the chance would attack, hinder, and disrupt anyone who is on their journey to his recognition. A gloomy, dark wood that surely represented the unconsciousness overwhelmingly, that those lost within their own personal self-created illusions literally can't see the wood for the trees. They can't see the overall of their situation, which would be the forest, or creation as a whole, only the trees, which would be all the agreements and attachment ideas that lock them into their illusionary bubbles, that they can't see beyond what they have restricted themselves to. So they can't see the wood for the trees, and only certain trees at that. Anyway, we eventually began to ascend a gentle slope, the forest falling back behind us, the literal idea of going uphill, always a preferable representation of improving one's position in life, awareness and recognitional speaking, and what came into view was a gleaming, high-tech, sci-fi city of a kind, lit up in glorious illumination, to the extent that it was rather overwhelming to the personal perception. This seemed to be our destination as the guide continued to drive me toward it, so maybe a glimpse of a future view of an alternative position in life for those who stick with their awareness process. The dark, forbidding forests of creation left behind, and into this technicolor, glorious space-age city of lights instead. The scene switched, and I was now in my personal self recreated house on the real side. I would be sitting in my living room, and there present also would be my parents, Gwen and Peter. Very often the guides assume the forms of parents and older siblings, but here I had the impression they were the genuine individuals. Agreements retained with them through my personal self that they can feature on the first floor of my house, which is the personal self, and in the living areas, representing also that the agreement is a conscious one, as they are in plain sight and not lurking in the attic, the basement, or various other unconscious representing places in the house. Agreements with those also on their process of awareness makes sense, as we support each other on the journey. So with Peter, this would not be a cause for concern. Gwen, on the other hand, based on her evident decision to remain with the personal self, and indeed with Peter's real side experience he shared several weeks ago, where following her only led him descending deeper and deeper into a creation down flights of stairs, would suggest an agreement or attachment that perhaps needed evaluating and addressing. Also in the room was another individual, a woman, and she was in the process of activating a portal. It's difficult to determine the method she employed. It seemed that it was more based on her intent to do so, but in addition she would move in a curious way, almost as though in a geometrical pattern. I'm uncertain who this woman was. Maybe another guide, or another individual on her awareness process. But I had the impression that she was here to reveal this portal, and the fact that it was on the first floor of my personal house maybe hinted at the possibility of such portal manifestations being a physical level actuality in due course. Maybe we might literally have individuals or even guides appear on the physical, make a portal, and invite us to accompany them, especially if things get rather unworkable in creation where we currently are positioned. Maybe this was a portal to the sci-fi city from the first scene, or maybe if it is required that we travel somewhere on the Earth, but that due to restrictions that may be implemented by the controllers, then portals may be a viable means of doing so. And so, this woman completed her portal making, though nothing resembling a portal could I perceive, and yet she stepped forward and vanished from sight. This would make sense if these portals start to manifest on the physical, as it may be so that we lack the perception through the physical senses to see them. Their frequency may operate beyond the visible light spectrum, which is the only frequency band the human senses can decode. A little like Wi-Fi and other such frequencies. They are there, but we just can't see them, as they don't fall within the visible light frequency band. Although no portal could I see, the woman now having departed through it, I had the impression, the sense of the portal, and we may well experience this if we do start having portals manifesting on the physical. We may more sense them through our real awareness or intuition of the personal self than see them with our physical eyes. I went to follow her through the portal, standing in the position she had been, and at that moment Gwen, my mother, voiced her discontent at my chosen want to do so, indicating still further that, like all individuals who choose to remain with the personal self, if we agree with them, if we limit ourselves by our decision to retain them in our experience, then our experience will be limited accordingly. To align with the creational experience of others, that the experience is continually shared, must have you agree along similar lines of cause and effect that this be so, and with Gwen choosing to remain fixedly with the personal self, this would limit someone intending to ultimately step beyond the personal self and its simulation. And indeed, as she voiced her disapproval, so did it detract from my ability to access the portal, as though the distraction was enough to miss its momentary presence before it faded. But like anything, a different outcome is simply a decision away, and at any moment we can make the necessary adjustments, address better these personal restrictions of ideas, agreements, and attachments, and this was evidently the guides showing me the potential creational tap-lining anchor that Gwen still represents for my personal self. The scene switched, and it was as though I was given the view of an ill-intended dark force agent hunting down various gifted individuals on the real side. I couldn't determine if the individuals being hunted were on their process of awareness, but by virtue of how they had drawn the attention of the dark forces, and that the dark forces had deployed agents to capture or eliminate them, suggested they were of concern to the creational controllers. So maybe individuals getting ready to begin their awareness journeys. Regardless of awareness, as I said, the hunted all seemed to have remarkable skills and abilities on the real side, almost like real side X-Men or magicians, and perhaps this was cause for additional concern with the dark forces, or maybe that they wanted to attempt to bring them around and make them black magician dark force assets, as though these gifted individuals had accessed the ethereal parts of their personal selves and were able to readily utilize the psychic science forces of them, and usually, as is the case, they have the option of becoming white magicians or tempted into becoming dark force black magicians, although both options will keep them in cause and effect creation regardless of what they use their ethereal vehicle manipulating abilities for, as is the design of the simulators. Anything activated and decided through the 5 bodies, thought, emotion, or ethereal ability, has an effect that must then be experienced. One of the hunted was a woman, and she had the ability to levitate, pass through solid objects, etc. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't evade what was a very efficient and talented dark force hunter. Evidently, the controllers had deployed their most formidable agent for the task, or one skilled enough to deal with these psychic science utilizing individuals. She would blast at her pursuer also with electrical discharges from her hands, but this didn't seem to stop the dark agent, as he would rather chase her into a sort of caged area that looked like a series of enclosed tennis courts, and it was there that she was apprehended. So, as much as she had these skills, operating in creation and through the personal self, with no real awareness protection, had her rather at the mercy then of agreements that must dwell within her personal consciousness, that facilitated her capture, as nothing can feature in our experience without our decision that it be so. Agreements are decisions, and with a consciousness being overwhelmingly programmed into agreements with the controllers over lifetimes, so this agreement can be taken advantage of at any time, and control be imposed upon the woman, who probably was oblivious to these subconscious agreements that allowed her capture. There was another scene where I was with one individual, very possibly a guide, as were my impressions, and due to the capturing of these various gifted individuals, we had in fact approached another, who would shortly be hunted also. Seems we were unable to assist the others, as though their agreements and decisions disallowed our infringement into their decided affairs, and we couldn't move against their free will. As much as they decided to be able to be captured through their subconscious agreements, so they must decide and agree to be assisted, and if they don't extend that agreement, it can't be so. It's as though they had created their movie where they are to be captured, but hadn't included any rescuers or heroes that would come in and save them. So nowhere could the would-be rescuers feature unless through abrasive imposition. And even though the captured think they would want this, their overall agreements and decisions of the created consciousness that affect their experience, and who, if anyone, is able to feature in it, told a different story. This individual, however, not only had amazing abilities on the real side, but he also had more awareness than the others, who had been successfully hunted down. As such, he had agreement that allowed the guides to feature in his experience on the real side, and we were then able to forewarn him at least of his imminent danger. He looked human, though completely hairless, and his skin had a slight blue tinge to it. He also seemed to be a map maker, is how I will describe him. He could read any individual's consciousness, then draw extensive destiny maps that seemed to have far more detail than the parchments he used should have been able to contain, as though the maps were multi-dimensional. This would make sense, as the personal self is multi-dimensional also. The consciousness of the mind and emotions, etc. The maps were basically outlining the individual's destiny, those that he read, based on what they were deciding through the consciousness idea construction of their personal selves. I'm uncertain if he was taking real awareness into consideration, the real intent, or the degree by which individuals embrace their real intent, beyond the created consciousness construction, or if his reading was just limited to the ideas contained within the consciousness, and the predictions of destiny stemming from that alone. But regardless, it was a remarkable ability, and as such, this had him marked as another dark force target, as he would make for a valuable asset, and if he didn't agree, I'm sure they would attempt to eliminate him. He was vulnerable also, as his process of awareness had barely begun, and with a fluctuation to be expected between real awareness intent protection and personal self-intent vulnerability, so would he be more susceptible to attack on the real side, and indeed the physical. He seemed unconcerned, however, and as he so vacillated from personal self to real awareness intent, so would there be windows of attack opportunity and moments where the real awareness the real guides and life protections couldn't be so. And indeed, the scene switched, and he was attacked. An assassination attempt, in fact. He would be in a building or other that seemed to present as his personal self, recreated on the real side, and with agreements then, through his personal self subconscious, to the potentiality of attack, and as he stepped into the personal self, as he would inevitably do, so this facilitated the dark force agent's access to his personal self house and personal self experience. The same agent who had hunted down the other gifted individuals. The dark agent would blast at the blue-skinned man with a kind of laser gun, dropping the target, and the dark agent would nudge the motionless individual with a foot, seemingly satisfied that he had dispatched the target and then departed. The target had seemingly agreed with the ideas that any bullet or laser fire represented, that the dark forces could impose upon his experience abrasively by virtue of being thus afflicted by the weapon on the real side. Or maybe it was a view of an actual assassination. However, as I watched on, the guide from earlier, who had approached this blue-skinned man with me, would draw my attention to the prone man's wounds. There were great tears and holes in his body, and you could see the blood and tissue where the skin no longer was. But he wasn't bleeding at all, and in fact the wounds seemed to be miraculously healing of their own accord. This individual was even more remarkable than I realized, and within moments he was completely reconstituted and whole again, no evidence of any wounds remaining, and would then sit up and grin at us as though nothing had happened. I would realize then that this individual was a kind of self-repairing cyborg, and practically indestructible, and another cyborg deciding to become more aware and step up at that. No wonder he seemed so unconcerned, as we warned him initially about the potential assassination attempt. We must always remember that it's the real awareness that decides to become more aware and recognize the ease, and encourages then its personal self to align with this real intent. The body form itself is irrelevant. It's just the vehicle utilized by the real awareness to go through creation with. This cyborg did then agree also to accompany us, for the guide and I had another destination. But amusingly, this cyborg's decided means of accompanying us was to collapse his robotic vehicle. It seemed to fold and accordion in on itself, and then he asked if we wouldn't mind placing his now more compacted body into a suitcase that was leaning against the wall. We would do so, the suitcase about the size of a small luggage container, and off we would go, the suitcase remarkably light, as though its occupant weighed very little, and then a brief final scene, as we were in some kind of advanced space-age craft or other, preparing to embark on a journey, now joined by a large number of individuals. Dwayne was present and was to accompany us also, as we secured the suitcase containing the cyborg carefully on one of the seats. Dwayne, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Looks like you made some new friends again, the blue people. A step at a time. The futuristic city as a possible glimpse into future affairs, but we will see. And the portals, yes, they're all around, and we will just become aware of them. It's all in the awareness."
You create your own portals too, Kevin? What is your experience with that?
What are my experience of creating portals?
Yes.
Well, so far my experience with portals tend to be mainly on the real side, or if I have in my in-between states, do portals manifest in my bedroom and then bleed overs from the real side, then feature on the physical level. But I haven't had any portals other than those. I haven't been like, I mean, some people have reported seeing portals manifesting right in front of them, or even seeing them in the sky, but personally I haven't seen those yet. But Dwayne was saying the other day, as we continue on through our awareness, we will become more and more aware of these portals that are everywhere. And also through our real awareness discernment, will we probably be able to discern where these portals go, and if where they lead to will be somewhere beneficial or somewhere that is not. Because you can imagine these portals could ping you all over creation, and I doubt all of them will take you to places that you would like to be.
Yeah. That'd be a good show, you know, portal number 1, portal number 2, portal number 3. Which would you like to choose? Remember that game show we had? Forget what it was called, but we should do a show on that too. The agreement you mentioned early on, agreement, very important here in creation, especially when you're agreeing to the authorities and all their systems that they created. All the science, the religion, educational, spiritual, all these things that have been agreed to that supposedly are real, but are just distractions in a way. Although we can use them for references to see what's not real, but the agreement thing is big here in creation, obviously, if you see it for what it is, because agreement makes it so for everybody, you know, or not so. You agree that the real guides don't exist, or that they ignore it, or whatever, they don't exist, and they lose that opportunity. But if they agree the authorities exist and all these people telling them what to do or what it's about, that's what exists for them, and then they go on with their life and they miss the opportunity. And that's the way it's been going for a long time here. Now the real guides are here making their presence, and we can take that and utilize it for ourselves and others. And then we can create things through agreement too. Agree that they exist, and then they exist, you know. So it's just agreement is a biggie here in creation. And even agreeing to the real universes, you know, agreeing to support the real universes and to support the real guides. Agreeing to that is a big thing too. And then life will support you, and they'll support you. And then of course you have to do something to contribute in some way. but that agreement is first. We're working with this girl here in Baja. She's had 2 experiences with Dwayne and I, coming to her on the real side and basically just standing in front of her and giving her the opportunity to, well, she reported this back to me because I was doing the dream interpretation at that time. I don't do it anymore at the cafe, but at that time she said, yeah, that Dwayne and I appeared to her on the real side. We're just standing there. And then we just recently, we talked to her again, giving her the opportunity for her and her mother and her brother, who are all like really, they come back with a lot of experiences from their dreams. They're seeing a lot, to step up and agree, basically decide to step into this and to participate in what is happening, what we're doing, since we're the front lines, you could say. But she's still hesitant. But it's that agreement that make a world of difference for her. Her mother opted out. She's still on the fence, but this happens so often when people get the experiences and they don't take the opportunity to go further with them. They just see it for what they see it for, but there's so much more of these experiences. It's like everything that we do. There's always room for expansion, especially on the real side when we bring things back. And this girl was a good example how if she would just take that step and start, doing the new you and watching, what the guides in life show her, it's that easy, but it's hard to make that decision for some people to take that step because it is an unknown. You say, what's there? And she understands that once she takes that step, she can't turn back. She gets that part, so that's why she's hesitant too. Well, anything else with that, Kevin? Should we go on?
Yeah, just briefly in regards to portals, I mean, a lot of experiences I've had quite recently are suggesting that all the new friends will soon be having portals featuring in their physical level, on the physical level in their experiences, and these portals are all a part also, it's also associated with the possible alien interventions into human affairs, but obviously again all from a beneficial, making sense with life perspective and backed by the real guides. And so it's very likely that perhaps these portals will be access points to allow traveling between the physical level and possibly where these aliens are located or based, whether that happens to be, or maybe who knows for certain, but it's definitely a case that these will be featuring soon in the experiences of those who continue to support Dwayne and the guides and maintain their focus and real intent.
So it won't be necessarily a spaceship, but it could be a portal that we traverse into another area, position.
Either or, I think that these are various options that are being provided according to the circumstances. Maybe where it may not be feasible for spaceships to come down, perhaps then a portal is made available. I would suggest it would just depend on everyone's individual circumstances and situations.
Mm-hmm. Spaceship is a lot more dramatic. Usually, the portal is more.
Might be a bit scarier for the person as well. So again, that may depend on the individual. Are they likely to get a bit unnerved when a great flying saucer lands in their backyard, or would they prefer to take a portal? So again, it may be very much an individualized situation.
Yeah.
And then you've got to be very careful that, of course, the dark forces, knowing this is going on, they don't start popping up their own portals and bringing down their own spaceships. And so that's where the real awareness discernment will come in. And just like it is on the real side, where you can read the intent, if you're standing in the nowness of your real awareness on the physical, you should be able to determine the intent of the individual you are in the presence in. not quite as readily as on the real side. You will see the real awareness will arrange the experience in such a way as it's very apparent. It'll add distortion and things to what you're seeing, but nevertheless, in theory, you should be able to read intent, and if not through your real awareness, then at least through the intuition of your personal self.
Yeah, if you're sincere, you'll be guided anyway.
Because if you see with children, they always know the intent of an individual, because again, they're much more intuitive anyway, and they're more connected with their real awareness before indoctrination. So children, they always know if someone's a bad person or not. You know, they can just instinctively know. So it's that same thing. It's just connecting with the parts of the personal self, the intuition that can more readily determine intent, and beyond that, you know, even the real awareness, which of course can read intent and ideas throughout all creation. So
Okay, second experience, Kevin.
This real side experience was rather peculiar for my personal self to understand, not necessarily what was taking place, but the exact nature of it, and the curious fate that would befall an individual who was accompanying me during it. There seemed to be a base of operations, a kind of structured stone complex, wherein the main chamber of would be a group of very aware beings that I'm fairly confident were the real guides. There they would sit about a large table, as though it were a council meeting. It seemed they had set up this particular assignment, that one individual and myself had been tasked with, and had agreed to execute. We would be constantly travelling from this place, carrying out these assignments, which consisted of a series of excursions, and always returning back and reporting in, as it were, to the council of guides as to our success or failure. No verbal dialogue was exchanged, more impressions, and so the exact specifics of the exchange was not made available for my personal self. Only the overall impression that once again we were seeking out other individuals, species, and beings throughout the creational simulator, and extending them the opportunity of becoming more aware, bringing them on board with the galactic activities, and so overall getting agreement wherever possible and feasible. The specific species we were approaching, the means by which we were doing so, were a little along the lines of the insectoid beings we had to engage with in another temple. In another real side experience I had previously recounted, where in that experience the insectoids, being located as they were, demanded a position in creation, a kind of dimensional weak spot, where the obscure dimensional area of this simulator that they resided in could be reached. In this experience, this stone complex seemed to have a similar use as that temple, in that it was only here that dimensional travel could be actualized to reach a certain place in creation. In addition, the individual and I, who was on this assignment, had to activate a very complex manipulation that allowed our dimensional travelling, a little like how, as we all laid in the temple in the other real side experience, the guide there had the ability and know-how to cause some manipulation that, coupled with the temple, could allow a passage for the insectoid creatures, almost as though, between then and now, we had learned this ability now ourselves, or at least a version of it, as these beings we sought now were not to come to us as the insectoid creatures had. We were very much to travel to their place in creation. The technique was very delicate. My personal self had no inkling as to how this was occurring. It just sat back and watched my real awareness and that of my companions go about the necessary procedures. I was very conscious of how, if the personal self interjected in any way, it could very well interfere with the precise execution of our dimensional travelling. I have experienced this before, where on previous real side experiences from years ago, we had a whole series of practices and trainings regarding a portal creating and travelling through them, and many a time the personal self interjected and the portal was misaligned. I would have said now that part of that practice back then was for these situations we are involved with here at this time, when we would be utilizing these practiced abilities to seek out all these beings and aliens in all these difficult to reach locations that required this portal method to find. But here we were successful. We made no errors, and we reached the intended destinations and returned to home base just as readily. Most of the escapades made no sense to my personal self, so strange were the places and beings we encountered. It's as though the personal self couldn't process what it was shown. It had no references for it. So much of the detail was lost, aside from the impressions of what we were doing overall. Contact, agreement securing, etc. The real awareness, of course, knowing what was transpiring, and everything made sense to its perception of events. As I said, every time we made a journey, we completed what we set out to achieve, or did what we could realistically, and then would return and make our report to the real guides, were debriefed, and off we would go again. There was one place that the personal self did have the view of, and was able to make a little sense of, a kind of realm or dimension of chaos, where nothing seemed to make sense according to the decided laws of physics of what the personal self knows in this lifetime and world. The beings we encountered were an assortment of description-defying body forms, all of great size, very sentient, and quite aware too. They all mingled in this place of nonsensical chaos. I had the impression it was a spot in creation where everything was according to the thoughts of these beings, just as it actually is in fact, as seen on the real side, with intent, thought, etc., instantly manifesting. So perhaps a position beyond the physical, but not necessarily, maybe a realm or dimension where no physical level exists. Perhaps the densest layer, the physical, had not been decided as to being added to the astral through to the etheric, and so instantaneous thought and emotion to effects in the experience of these beings. The environment then as chaotic and random as the thoughts that tend to be continuously entertained with individuals through the personal self. Seems we were successful in garnering agreement from these curious beings, though one of them kept declaring how it was ridiculous, how this was ridiculous, how that was ridiculous. He certainly seemed to find practically everything to be ridiculous, seemingly. The travelling to and from these various dimensions was a delicate business, as I said, and not without risk. For on this last venture into the world of madness and strange creatures, it's as though my companion somehow got caught up in everything. It's as though he indulged his personal self, allowing it to be perhaps too overawed with this crazy environment. This had him step out of his real awareness and into a personal self-idea, consideration, creating mode. This then had the effect of him getting caught up in this place, instead of standing detached and indifferent to it from the position of the real awareness. Instantly he would vanish, and one of the large beings here gestured to a small crib that had manifested, that contained a small wailing baby. And yes, my companion, by stepping into the personal self and activating it here, had rather stuck himself, and seemingly to the extent that he even had automatically projected himself into a future lifetime on Earth as a consequence. My impression was that he was currently an individual residing in the West, but he was now to have a new incarnation as a baby in the East. He was to be Chinese, in fact. I was unable to assist my companion, and had to return back alone to where the guides awaited, and would explain to them what had transpired. So some of our assignments are not without peril, certainly, and this explains why there was so much training with portals and such for many years on the real side prior to these assignments. But even then, slips in focus, the indulging of the personal self, can certainly have consequences, and as things continue on, it would seem that the focus and the recognition of the real intent will need to become more so, for we rather have to keep up with the is as it surges through creation, and all the various facets of how it is referenced and presented, and the various assignments we undertake in accordance. For all this will require we stand more so in the reality of our real awareness, or we will rather fall by the wayside and get caught up in creation, as my companion here did, though always there is the option to readdress his error and redo the experience, as everything is as according to what is being decided now. Nothing's a given or set in stone, and is subject always to cause and effect alteration. So, although I couldn't assist him, in reality he needs no assistance other than to decide and make the necessary focus and intent adjustments. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "That's very interesting in what's going on, and the influence that's taking place through everything. Everything's very intense. Nothing taken for granted, and you see what's going on objectively. And yes, the individual can change his intent and choices at any time, and it's shown accordingly. And I mentioned it before, when Heather stepped back, and I saw her on the real side, shrinking back. Again, it's with her intent, and the intent is very important. We all do things here. We get caught up in things, etc. You go back and forth. Some days are better than others. But the intent, and to establish that, is very important. It's like an honourability, sincerity, etc., and especially gratitude. You reinforce it with these ideas, and you see that intent. What is your real intent overall, as we're all in life, and each person decides that, and it's up to each of us to decide that, and it's very important. It's not a matter of liking something, that we want to go here or do that. It's about what is your intent. And we can do those things, and yes, we will go up and down the ladder, you might say, but as long as the intent's there, you just go back to that intent and re-establish that. What I do for myself is that when these challenges come about, they just reinforce my intent. I just take the risk, and that is that I just adamantly focus on my intent, and to make sure that's even more so than ever before with this reality. The all is, the isness life is, and what it is, and to recognize it. And that's the idea too. The individuals can redo these experiences, just like retaking a test. and they're shown things accordingly, and you see it objectively. So, you are the messenger, the witness, for people to see this, and if they take it to heart, fine. If they don't, well, that's their choice also. We're given the examples, and it's a whole lot getting through this creation.
You didn't understand part of the experience. You said in the beginning. So that's the way a lot of this is. Like, we don't have to really understand it. We just do it, or understand the mechanics of it. It may show up later for us to understand, but a lot of this, it's like beyond the personal self to understand everything that's going on. So we just do it, have the intent, just do it, do something, and it'll be okay. Dwayne doesn't always understand everything either. I mean, on the personal level, you can't. It's too limited. The guy in the movie that we reviewed, Dr. Strange, just recently, he didn't understand the mechanics of what he was just doing it. He's creating all these, like, creating portals and creating, he studied the books, but the mechanics of it, I'm sure he didn't understand a lot, because a lot of it came to him innately, like the others in the school there in the temple. They said, how did you couldn't have possibly learned all this. You have just been here a short while. How could you learn all this? So it just came to him, and a lot of stuff does come to us innately, and just it's a matter of doing something that makes sense to contribute with all of life and what we're doing. Don't have to understand everything. It's not about that. Just be real. And I think knowledge is sometimes overrated. Information, it only goes to a certain point, and then other things kick in, like your real awareness. In between that is your intuition, your impressions, imagination. But your real awareness kicks in, and it knows. Whereas the personal self doesn't have that accessibility to certain things. Well, again, thank you, Kevin, for all you do and for sharing with us. And these will go out to the world here, these recordings, and people will benefit greatly from them. Thank you. Okay, let's sing the New You, and then we'll get on with whatever we do next. New you, you.
You.